Evening, dreamers, lower the mask and rest easy. No one needs saving tonight. Tonight we drift up, all the way up, to the top of a great glittering city, to the penthouse at the summit of the tallest tower, where the richest and cleverest man in the world sits alone above 10 million lights. You know his name. You know the smooth voice and the tailored suits and the empire with his name on every other building. And you know that he has spent a fortune and a lifetime trying to destroy one man, a man who has never robbed him, never struck him, never wanted anything from him but to be left in peace. The question almost no one stops to ask is the only one that matters. Why? Why would the man who has everything hate the one who only ever tried to help? You do not have to think hard about any of this tonight. That is not what we are here for. Let the words drift past you the way the city lights drift past far below a high window, distant and glittering and asking nothing of you. If you fall asleep before we reach the end, good, that is the whole idea. The story keeps just fine without you. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here. Some of you are in a great city yourselves, with lights burning in 1,000 windows across the dark. Some of you are somewhere far quieter, where the only light is the one beside your bed. If you feel like it, before you drift off, tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. And if the quiet lore helps you sleep, the channel is here every night to walk you back out into the dark. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us go looking for the wound beneath the crown. Start with the puzzle of him, because it is stranger than people realize. He is not a common criminal. He does not need money, having more of it than nations. He does not need power in the ordinary sense, already being the most powerful man in his city, perhaps in his country, perhaps in the world. He is, by every measure the world uses, a towering success. The smartest man alive, or close to it. The self-made master of a vast empire. A name spoken with awe and fear across the globe. By all rights, he should be the most satisfied man in existence, sitting at the very top of everything he ever wanted. And instead he burns, night and day, with a hatred so total it has organized his entire life around it. He pours his genius, his fortune, his every waking hour into the destruction of a single person. A person, it must be said, who is by every account kind. That is the puzzle. The greatest man in the world, consumed by hatred for the gentlest. And the answer to it, once you find it, tells you something not just about him, but about a wound that lives in smaller, quieter forms in a great many hearts. Because his hatred is not really about the other man at all, not underneath. It is about himself. It is about a question that other man's very existence forces him to confront. A question so unbearable that he would rather burn down the world than sit with it. And to understand that question, we have to go back, all the way back, past the towers and the fortune and the fame, to a poor and hungry boy in the worst part of the city who looked up at those same towers from below and swore, with everything in him, that one day he would stand at the top. The city he was born into is a place of two halves, and he was born into the wrong one. High above, there are the gleaming towers, the wealth, the light, the people who have everything. And down below, in the shadow of those towers, there are the poor streets, the hard places, the parts of the city the light never quite reaches. That is where he came from. Not from money, not from comfort. From the very bottom, from a poor and struggling family in the worst part of a rich city, close enough to the towers to see them every day, far enough below to know they were not for him. And his home, from what little the stories tell, was not a happy one. His father was a hard man, a bitter one, the kind worn down and turned cruel by a life of never having enough. There was little warmth in that house and less encouragement. A boy growing up there learned early that the world was a hard place, that no one was coming to save him, that whatever he wanted he would have to seize for himself with his own two hands, because no one would ever hand it to him. It is a bleak education, but it forges a certain kind of person, hard and driven and hungry, and it forged him. But here is the thing that set him apart from every other poor and hungry child in those hard streets. He was brilliant, not merely clever. Brilliant on a scale that comes along once in a generation. A mind so quick and deep and powerful that it marked him out from earliest childhood as something extraordinary. He understood things no one had taught him. He solved problems that stumped grown adults. He looked at the world with a cold, clear, penetrating intelligence that saw straight to the heart of how things worked. In another life, born to wealth, that mind might have been nurtured, celebrated, given every advantage. Born where he was born, it was simply a tool, the one tool he had. The single lever by which he might one day pry himself up out of the darkness and into the light above. There was one soft place in the hard boy, one crack in the armor even at the very beginning, and it is worth knowing about, because it is almost the only tenderness in his whole story. He had a sister, a younger sister, whom he loved, genuinely and without calculation, in a way he never quite managed to love anyone else for the rest of his life. In the cold house, in the hard years, she was the one warm thing, the one person he wanted to protect, the one relationship that asked nothing of his ambition and gave him something his climbing never could. Whatever else was true of the frightened, striving boy, he loved his sister, and that love was real. And it is the proof that there was, once, a capacity for genuine warmth in him, a door that might have opened onto a very different life. But even that love, in the end, got tangled up in his wound, the way everything in him eventually did. Because he could not simply love her and let it be enough. He had to protect her, provide for her, prove to her and to himself that he could lift them both out of the darkness, and so even his tenderness became bound up with his need to rise, to conquer, to be great. And in some tellings, that bond frayed and broke under the weight of everything he became, until the sister he loved could no longer recognize the man her brother had turned into, could no longer bear the coldness and the cruelty that his climbing had required. He lost her, in the way he lost everything soft in himself, sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. And the loss of the one person he truly loved was one more stone in the wall he built around his heart, one more proof to his bitter mind that warmth was a weakness he could not afford. There is something especially sad in a man who had, right there at the start, the seed of a good life, and could not let it grow. Because if he had built his life around that love, around protecting and cherishing the one person who mattered to him, he might have become someone else entirely. A hard man, yes, but a man with a warm center, a man whose ferocity served something tender. Instead, he let the ambition swallow the love, let the climbing crowd out the caring, until the soft place was paved over, and the only thing left was the need to rise. He chose greatness over warmth, again and again, at every fork in the road, and each time he chose it, he became a little more the thing he is, and a little less the thing he might have been. The sister was the road not taken, made flesh, and like every road he did not take, he could not bear to look back at it, because looking back meant feeling what it had cost him. And so, very young, he made a decision, and it became the organizing purpose of his entire life. He would rise, he would take that extraordinary mind, and he would use it to climb, out of the slums, up past everyone who had ever looked down on him, all the way to the very top of the glittering city, until he stood above it all. Until he was the most powerful man in the place that had been built to keep people like him down. He would make himself great. Not be given greatness, not inherit it, not have it handed to him by anyone. Make it, forge it, earn it, with nothing but his own genius and his own relentless will. That was the vow of the hungry boy in the dark. And the astonishing thing, the thing that makes him who he is that he actually did it. Let us stay in the slum a while longer, because the particular texture of where he came from explains the particular shape of what he became. It was not simply poverty. It was poverty lived in the shadow of wealth, which is a special and corrosive kind. Had he grown up somewhere poor and remote, where everyone was poor together and no other life was visible, the hunger might have been simpler, gentler even. But he grew up in a rich city, in its poorest corner, close enough to the towers and the wealth to see them every single day, to walk past the fine buildings and the well-dressed people and the shining cars. To know exactly what he did not have, held always just out of reach, gleaming, mocking, that is a poverty that does not merely deprive. It humiliates. It rubs your face in what others have, and you do not, every day, until the wanting becomes a kind of permanent low fever in the blood. And a bright child in that situation learns something that never leaves them. He learns that the world is divided into those who have and those who do not, and that the line between them is not fairness, not merit, not virtue, but simply power. The people up in the towers were not better than the people down in the slums. They were not smarter, not kinder, not more deserving. They were simply higher, and being higher, they got everything, while being lower meant getting nothing, no matter how much better you might be. He looked at that from below, with his cold, clear, brilliant eyes, and he drew the lesson that would run his whole life. The world does not reward goodness. It does not reward merit. It rewards power, and only power. And if you want anything at all, you must seize power by any means necessary, because no one will ever give you a thing you have not forced them to give. It is a bleak philosophy, and a false one, but you can see exactly how a brilliant child would arrive at it from where he stood, and once arrived at, it shaped everything. It is why he became so ruthless, because he had concluded, young, that ruthlessness was simply how the world worked. That the people at the top had gotten there by seizing and holding, and that any softness was a luxury for those already safe. It is why he trusted no one, because he had learned that the world was a competition for scarce power in which everyone was a rival. And it is why, when the alien came, offering goodness freely and asking nothing, the great man simply could not believe it was real. His entire understanding of the world, forged in that humiliating poverty, told him that no one gives anything away, that power is always seized and never shared, that anyone who appears to be good is running a con he has not yet detected. The visitor did not fit his model of reality at all, and rather than update the model, a thing his pride would never allow. He decided the stranger must be lying. The slum taught him that goodness was impossible, and he believed that lesson so deeply that when actual goodness arrived, he declared war on it, rather than admit he had been wrong. The climb was long and hard, and it cost him things, and we will come to what it cost. But he climbed. He clawed his way up through school on the sheer force of his intellect, winning every scholarship, outscoring every rival, absorbing knowledge faster than anyone had ever seen. He studied everything, mastered everything, science and engineering and business and the hidden mechanics of power. And then he began to build. He took an idea and turned it into a small company, and turned that company, through brilliance and ruthlessness and tireless work, into a larger one, and then a larger one still, until the thing he had built with his own hands towered over the city like the buildings he had gazed up at as a boy. He named it after himself, of course. His name, the name of the poor boy from the slums, went up in great letters on the tallest towers, on laboratories and factories and skyscrapers, on half the city. The empire he built came to touch everything, every industry, every corner of the city's life, until it was nearly impossible to live in that place without in some way depending on something he owned. He made himself not just rich, but essential, woven into the very fabric of the city, the man behind the curtain of modern life. And with the wealth came the power, and with the power came the thing he had wanted most of all since he was a hungry boy looking up from the dark. Respect, admiration, the awe of the very people who once would have looked straight through him. Stand back and see the magnitude of what he accomplished, because it is genuinely staggering, and it matters for everything that comes after. He started with nothing, less than nothing. A poor boy in a hard home in the worst part of the city, with every disadvantage the world can hand a person. And by nothing but the power of his own mind and the ferocity of his own will, he made himself into one of the most powerful human beings on the face of the earth. No one gave it to him. No one helped him. He earned every single bit of it, forged himself from raw hunger into a titan. Exactly as he had vowed to do. Whatever else he is, and he is many dark things, he is that. A self-made man in the truest and most complete sense the phrase has ever held. He willed himself from the gutter to the summit, and there is a kind of terrible greatness in that, and he knows it, and it is the thing he is proudest of in all the world. It is worth pausing to take the true measure of his mind, because we say the word genius so easily that it loses its force, and his genius is genuinely one of the wonders of his world. He is not brilliant in one field. He is brilliant in all of them. He is a physicist who can rewrite the laws as they are understood, an engineer who can build machines a generation ahead of anyone else, a chemist, a biologist, a roboticist, a master of a dozen sciences, any one of which would make an ordinary person famous. And he is not only a scientist, he is a businessman without equal, able to see the flow of money and power through a whole economy and bend it to his will. He is a strategist who can think 10 moves ahead of the cleverest opponents. He speaks many languages, masters any skill he turns his attention to, absorbs and retains and synthesizes knowledge at a rate that seems barely human. There has perhaps never been a human mind quite like his. And that vast intelligence is itself part of his tragedy, because a mind that powerful is a lonely thing to carry. Imagine being so far ahead of everyone around you that ordinary conversation is a kind of slow torture, that you have to constantly translate your thoughts down into simpler forms for people who cannot follow where you actually live. Imagine never, in your whole life, meeting a mind that can truly keep pace with yours, never being genuinely challenged, never being understood at the deepest level. Always the smartest person in every room, and therefore always, in a sense, alone in every room. His genius set him apart from other people, as surely as his poverty once did, walled him off inside a mind no one else could enter, so that even at the height of his fame, surrounded by admirers and employees and rivals, he was profoundly, structurally alone. No one could reach him, because no one could keep up with him. And here is the cruel irony that sits at the center of his relationship with his great enemy. The alien from the sky is one of the very few beings on the planet who can actually match him, not in intellect perhaps, but in that experience of being fundamentally set apart, of being unique, of having no true peer. Two beings, each singular, each alone at the top of their own kind of greatness. In another world, they might have been the only two who could truly understand each other, the only ones who knew what it was to be that far beyond everyone else. They might have been friends, even, the loneliest man on earth and the last son of a dead world. Two solitudes that fit together. Instead, the great man's wound turned the one being who might have understood him into the one being he most needed to destroy. He drove away the only peer he ever had, because that peer's existence hurt his pride, and in doing so he sentenced himself to a loneliness even more complete than before. He could have had, in his enemy, the understanding he had craved his whole life. He chose, instead, the war. It is worth understanding what the climb actually cost him, because he paid a price for his greatness that he has never fully reckoned with, and the size of it is part of his tragedy. To rise the way he rose, from nothing to everything, a person cannot afford to be soft. Every rival must be outmaneuvered, every weakness hidden, every tender feeling set aside in the service of the climb. And so, step by step, on the long way up, he shed the things that might have slowed him. Friendships he could not afford to maintain, loyalties that became inconvenient, the capacity for trust, which is a liability in a world he had decided was a competition. Even in time, much of his ability to feel, because feeling deeply is dangerous when you are climbing over people, and it is easier to step on someone whose full humanity you have trained yourself not to feel. He arrived at the summit having quietly amputated, one by one, the parts of himself that make a life warm, because each of them had, at some point, threatened to hold him back. That is the hidden cost of a certain kind of success, and he paid it in full. He got everything he climbed for, and by the time he reached it, he was no longer the kind of person who could enjoy it. Because the very qualities that would have let him enjoy it, the warmth, the trust, the capacity for connection and contentment, were exactly what he had traded away to climb so high. It is a cruel bargain, and it is one that many people make in smaller ways, sacrificing the things that make life sweet in pursuit of things they believe will make life sweet, only to arrive at the goal and find themselves too hollowed out to taste it. He is that bargain carried to its absolute extreme. He gave up everything soft in himself to become the hardest and highest man in the world, and then discovered that a hard, high man has nothing left to be happy with, that he had spent the coin of his own capacity for joy to buy a throne he could not enjoy sitting on. And the deepest cruelty of the bargain is that it is irreversible, or nearly so. Because the parts of himself he traded away are not easily regrown. A person who has spent decades not trusting cannot simply decide to trust. A person who has trained himself not to feel the reality of others cannot simply switch that feeling back on. The warmth he sacrificed atrophied from disuse, and by the time he might have wanted it back, he had forgotten how to reach for it, had become so thoroughly the hard-climbing creature that the soft original person was buried beyond his own ability to recover. That is why he cannot simply choose to be happy, cannot simply decide to enjoy what he has, cannot take the obvious path out of his misery. The capacity to do so is one of the things he sold on the way up. He is rich beyond measure in everything except the inner faculties that would let him feel rich, the very things you can still choose to keep, and those he spent long ago and cannot buy back at any price, because they were never for sale in the first place. They can only be grown, slowly, through the very softness and trust and connection he sacrificed to rise, and he no longer remembers how. And that pride, you must understand, is not vanity, or not only vanity, it is the deepest and most load-bearing thing in him. Because that pride is the answer to his whole hard life. It is the proof that the hunger and the struggle and the cold home and the lonely climb all meant something, that he showed them all, that the boy they look down on became the man they look up to. His achievements are not just things he has, they are who he is, the entire foundation of his sense of himself, the sole reward for a life of unimaginable effort. Take away his greatness, and there is nothing underneath but the hungry, frightened boy in the dark, and that boy is the one thing in all the world he cannot bear to be again. So he holds his greatness the way a drowning man holds a plank. It is not pride, for pride's sake. It is survival. It is the only thing standing between him and the abyss he climbed out of. Remember that. Because in a moment, someone is going to fall out of the sky and threaten it, and you will understand why he reacts the way he does. It is worth understanding what he actually built, because the empire is not just a backdrop to his story, it is an extension of his soul, and it tells you who he is. He did not build a company, he built a kingdom. His corporation grew until it touched nearly every part of the city's life. its power and its water, its technology and its transport, its media, its medicine, its very buildings. He made himself, quite deliberately, indispensable, so woven into the fabric of the city that to strike at him was to strike at the city itself, so essential that the place could not function without him. It was a fortress made of dependence. As long as everyone needed him, no one could touch him, and he made very sure that everyone needed him. And he wrapped all of it in the robes of a benefactor, which is the most revealing thing of all. He gave money away, vast sums of it, to schools and hospitals and museums and charities, and he made certain his name went on every one of them, carved in stone above the doors. He wanted to be seen not as a mere rich man, but as the great patron of the city, its protector, its father, the man to whom everyone owed their comfort and their progress. He wanted love, you see. Underneath all the power, that was what he was really buying with all that giving. The love and gratitude of the city, the adoration of the people, the sense of being not just feared, but cherished, looked up to, needed. He had learned that money could buy almost anything, and he was trying with all his fortune to buy the one thing he had never had: to be loved. And it half worked. For a while. The city was grateful. His name was spoken with respect, even affection. He was the great man, the benefactor, the pride of the place he had risen from. But it was never quite real, and some part of him always knew it. Because gratitude bought with money is not love, it is a transaction, and a transaction can be undone the moment a better offer comes along. He had purchased the city's admiration, but he had not earned its heart. And purchased admiration is a hollow thing that never quite fills you, no matter how much of it you accumulate. He sat atop a mountain of bought gratitude and still felt, underneath, unloved, because you cannot actually buy the thing he was trying to buy. And then the stranger came and gave the city something for free that the great man had spent a fortune failing to purchase, and the hollowness of everything he had bought was suddenly unbearably exposed. The city's love had never really been his, it had only been rented, and the newcomer took it away without spending a cent, simply by being genuinely good, which was the one thing all the money in the world could never make the great man be. For a time he had it all, and it was enough, or nearly enough. He stood at the top of his city, the most powerful man in it, admired and feared and obeyed. He was, in the eyes of the world and in his own eyes, the greatest man in the place, the pinnacle of human achievement, living proof of what a single extraordinary human being could accomplish through nothing but their own gifts and will. He had reached the summit he had spent his whole life climbing toward, and for a while he stood there, at the top of everything, and surveyed all he had built, and it was good. And then he came. The other one. The one from the sky. It began, as these things do, with the city looking up. One day there was a stranger in the sky above the towers, a man who could fly, who could lift a falling bus with one hand, who could stand in front of gunfire and let the bullets fall away like rain. A man of impossible power, doing impossible good, saving people, asking nothing in return. The city had never seen anything like him, and the city fell in love. Overnight, the stranger from the sky became the most beloved figure the city had ever known, its protector, its hero, the one everyone looked up to, in every sense of the words. The people who had spent their lives looking up at the great man's towers now looked up instead at the man in the sky. You can perhaps already feel the wound opening, but let us name it precisely, because the precision matters. It was not that the newcomer was a rival for wealth or business or the ordinary kinds of power. The great man kept all of that. His empire stood untouched. No, what the stranger took was something the great man could not defend with money or genius or will, something he had spent his entire life earning, and now watched simply given away, effortlessly, to someone else. He took the city's adoration. He took the top of the mountain. The great man had clawed his way up from nothing to become the one the city looked up to. And now, without trying, without struggling, without earning it the way he had earned it, this newcomer had floated down and taken that place, the highest place, the one place that had made all the suffering worth it. And here is the detail that turned the wound into a lifelong hatred, the detail without which none of it makes sense. The newcomer had not earned his power at all. He had been born with it. He was not even from here. He was an alien, a being from another world who had simply arrived already possessing abilities no human effort could ever match. Everything the great man had bled and struggled and sacrificed for decades to build, this stranger surpassed simply by existing, simply by being born on a different planet. The self-made man, who had willed himself up from nothing through unimaginable effort, was looking at a being who had been handed, at birth, for free. A greatness he himself could never reach no matter how hard he worked, for the rest of his life. And the city loved the stranger for it. That was the thing that broke him, not the power, the unfairness, the cosmic, unbearable unfairness of it. At first, he did not hate the stranger. At first, he did what he had always done with anything powerful that entered his world. He tried to acquire it, to own it, to fold it into his empire the way he had folded in everything else. He reached out to the man from the sky, this being of impossible power, and he made him an offer, the kind of offer that had bought him anything he had ever wanted. Come work for me, be mine. All that power placed at the service of my empire, and in return, anything you could desire. It was, in his mind, a generous offer, even a natural one. Power recognizes power. Of course, this magnificent creature would want to align himself with the greatest man in the city. Of course, he would take the deal. And the man from the sky said no, politely, gently, but completely. He could not be bought. He would not be owned. He did not want money, or position, or any of the things the great man had to offer, because he already had the only thing he wanted, which was to help people, freely for its own sake. He served the city not for reward, but because it was right, and there was nothing the richest man in the world could offer that would mean anything at all next to that. The offer was not merely declined. It was, in a way the great man felt in his bones, rendered meaningless. Everything he had, everything he had built his whole life to be able to offer, was worth nothing to this being. His power did not work here. For the first time since he was a helpless boy in the slums, he had reached for something and been told, simply, no, and had no way to make it yes. That was the true beginning of the hatred, not the arrival, the refusal. Because in that no, the great man heard something intolerable. He heard that there existed, now, in his city, a power he could not buy, could not control, could not bend to his will, a being entirely beyond his reach, who owed him nothing, and feared him not at all. And worse, a being who by his very existence made a quiet statement the great man could not bear. That goodness was not for sale. That the highest things, the city's love, true admiration, the moral high ground, could not be purchased with all the money and genius in the world, could only be earned in a currency the great man had never possessed and could not acquire. The stranger had, without a single word of insult, exposed the one poverty the great man could never fix. He was rich in everything, except the thing that now mattered most. And so, having failed to own the man from the sky, he set out to destroy him. Because if he could not possess this power, could not control it, could not stand above it, then he could not allow it to exist. It was too great a threat, not to his empire, which remained untouched, but to the far more fragile thing underneath, his sense of himself as the greatest, the pinnacle, the proof of what a human being could be. As long as the stranger existed, floating above the city in the people's adoring eyes, the great man could never again believe himself the greatest. And believing himself the greatest was the plank he had been clinging to over the abyss his entire life. So the stranger had to go, not because he had done anything wrong, because he existed, and his existence was, to the great man, a wound that would not close as long as the one who caused it still drew breath. You have come a good way into this story now, and the night has grown deep. And if your thoughts are turning slow and soft, let them. You do not need to hold any of this. We have found the hungry boy in the slums, and the vow to rise, and the empire built from nothing, and the pride that was the whole reward for a hard life, and the stranger from the sky who took the top of the mountain without earning it, and the refusal that turned a wound into a war. What is left is the strangest and most revealing part, the philosophy the great man built to justify his hatred. The story he tells himself about why destroying the kindest being on earth is not villainy at all, but the highest and most noble thing a person could do. Let us go there gently, because it is where he becomes truly fascinating and truly sad. Because he does not think of himself as a villain. This is the crucial thing, and almost everyone gets it wrong. He does not lie awake believing himself the bad guy in the story. Quite the opposite. In his own mind, he is the hero. He is the one clear-eyed man willing to see the danger everyone else is too dazzled to notice. Willing to do the hard and thankless work of saving humanity from a threat it is too busy worshipping to fear. He has built an entire elaborate philosophy to house this belief, and the terrible thing about it is that parts of it are not stupid. Parts of it are even, in a certain cold light, almost persuasive. That is what makes him dangerous, and what makes him worth understanding rather than simply dismissing. His argument goes something like this. Humanity, he believes, is capable of greatness. He is himself the proof of it, a man who rose from nothing to reshape the world through nothing but human intellect and human will. Left to itself, he believes, the human race would continue to climb, to strive, to solve its own problems and reach its own heights, growing ever greater through its own effort, exactly as he did. But now there is this alien, this god who fell from the sky. And what happens to a species that has a god to solve its problems for it? It stops striving. It grows dependent, soft, childlike, forever looking up to the sky for rescue instead of learning to rescue itself. Why should humanity struggle to cure its own diseases, solve its own dangers, save itself from its own disasters, when there is a magical being who will simply swoop down and do it for them? The alien, he argues, however kind his intentions, is slowly robbing the human race of the very thing that makes it great. Its self-reliance, its need to strive, its destiny to become mighty through its own effort. And so, he tells himself, he is not attacking a hero. He is defending human dignity itself. He is the one man brave enough to say that humanity does not need a god, should not want a god, must not become a race of grateful children kneeling before a savior from the stars. He is fighting for the proposition that human beings should stand on their own feet, solve their own problems, be the authors of their own greatness, exactly as he was the author of his. In destroying the alien, he believes, he would be freeing humanity to fulfill its true potential, forcing it to grow up, to become the mighty self-reliant species he knows it can be. He is not the villain of the story. He is, in his own telling, the only true champion humanity has, the one man willing to be hated in order to save the human race from the soft cage of being saved. It is a magnificent piece of self-justification, and the reason it is so effective, the reason it can almost convince you, is that it contains a real truth wrapped around a lie. The real truth is this. There is something genuinely valuable in human striving, in solving your own problems, in not becoming helplessly dependent on a savior. A species, like a person, does grow strong through struggle and weak through being rescued from everything. That part is not wrong. He has taken a true and even noble idea, the dignity of self-reliance, and he holds it up as his banner, and it gleams. And it looks for all the world like the flag of a hero. There is a question that sits underneath his whole philosophy, and it is a genuinely deep one, worth turning over slowly in the quiet, because it is not as easy to answer as we might like. He asks, in effect, whether it is good for people to be saved, whether a humanity that has a God to rescue it will grow weak and dependent, will lose the strength that only comes from having to save yourself. And put that baldly, stripped of his envy and his cruelty, it is not a foolish question. There is something in it. A child who is never allowed to struggle does not grow strong. A person rescued from every difficulty never develops their own capacity. On the level of a single life, we know this is true. That struggle builds strength, and that being saved from everything can leave a person hollow and helpless. But here is where his argument, clever as it is, goes quietly wrong, and it is worth seeing exactly where, because the error is a revealing one. He assumes that help and strength are opposites, that to be aided is to be weakened, that a humanity with a protector must become a humanity of children. And that is simply not how it works, not for people and not for a species, because the deepest human strength has never been the strength of the person who needs no one. It has been the strength of people who help each other, who lift each other up, who face the darkness together rather than each alone. A hero who saves people does not weaken them by his example. He inspires them. He shows them what courage and kindness look like, and calls out the same qualities in them, so that a city with a protector becomes not weaker, but braver, not more childish, but more decent, lifted by the example of goodness freely given. The great man cannot see this, and his blindness to it is the truest sign of how his own wounds have warped him. Because he learned in the hard slums that you must save yourself alone, that no one helps anyone, that dependence is death. And so, he genuinely cannot conceive of help as anything but weakness, cannot imagine that being saved might make people stronger rather than weaker, because his whole brutal education taught him otherwise. He looks at the hero lifting the city up, and he sees only dependence, only weakness, only a people being robbed of their self-reliance, because that is the only lens his wounded past gave him. He cannot see the other thing, the truer thing, that people are strengthened by love and example far more than they are weakened by help, that a species learns goodness by being shown it, that we become our best selves not in grim isolation, but in the warmth of being cared for and caring in return. His philosophy is not stupid. It is just the philosophy of a man who was never helped, and so cannot believe that help is anything but a trap. He mistook his own wound for wisdom, and built a crusade on it, and the crusade was really just the shape of everything he never got. But underneath the gleaming banner is the lie, and the lie is about himself. Because his crusade was never really about humanity at all. If it were, he would be the kindest man alive, pouring his vast fortune into lifting up the human race, into schools and hospitals and cures and the elevation of the poor from exactly the kind of slum he crawled out of. And he does some of that, when it serves his image, but it is never the heart of him. The heart of him is the hatred, the obsessive personal need to destroy one specific being. And no philosophy about human dignity can quite hide the fact that his true motivation is far smaller and far more personal than the grand cause he wraps it in. He does not hate the alien because the alien threatens humanity. He hates the alien because the alien threatens him. Because as long as that being exists, he, the great man, is no longer the greatest, and he has dressed that small and bitter and intensely personal wound in the robes of a noble crusade, because he cannot bear to see it for what it is. That is the deepest truth about him, and it is worth sitting with, because it is a very human failing written very large. He has taken his own envy, his own wounded pride, his own unbearable feeling of having been surpassed, and he has told himself a story in which those small, ugly feelings are actually a grand and noble mission. He has convinced himself that his personal need to be the greatest is really a selfless crusade for all humanity. It is the oldest trick the human heart plays on itself, dressing up a selfish wound as a righteous cause. And he plays it on himself more elaborately and more completely than almost anyone ever has. His genius, which can build empires and outwit gods, turns out to be no protection at all against the one thing it cannot bear to see, which is the smallness of his own true motive. The smartest man in the world cannot solve the one problem that actually runs his life, because solving it would mean admitting that his great crusade is really just envy in a very fine suit. And that is why he can never win, no matter how clever his schemes, no matter how many times he comes close to destroying his enemy. Because even if he succeeded, even if he finally removed the alien from the world, it would not give him what he actually wants. The city would not suddenly love him the way it loved the man from the sky. The hollow place inside him would not fill. The hungry boy in the dark would still be there, still afraid, still unsure that all his greatness meant anything at all. He is not really trying to defeat his enemy. He is trying to defeat a feeling, the feeling of not being enough, of having been surpassed, of his life's work being rendered meaningless by someone who never had to work at all. And you cannot defeat a feeling by killing a man. The feeling would remain, and he would have to find a new reason for it, because the feeling was never really about the alien in the first place. It was always, from the very beginning, about himself. Once he had decided that the stranger must be destroyed, he turned the full force of that magnificent mind to the problem, and it is worth understanding how he went about it, because his method reveals him completely. He did not rage, not usefully. He studied. He treated the alien the way he treated every problem, as a puzzle to be solved, a system to be understood and then broken. He gathered every scrap of information about the being from the sky, watched him, tested him, probed for weakness with the patience of a scientist and the ruthlessness of a general. He was looking for the crack, the flaw, the single point where a being who seemed invulnerable might be brought down. And in time, he found it. There was a substance, rare and strange, a fragment of the alien's own destroyed homeworld that had traveled across space to Earth. And this substance, harmless to humans, was to the man from the sky a deadly poison, able to sap his strength, to bring the invulnerable low, to make the god bleed. When the great man learned of it, he understood at once that he had found his weapon. He acquired it, studied it, learned to harness it, built it into devices and weapons and traps, made it the centerpiece of his long campaign. It is a fitting weapon when you think about it, and he surely appreciated the poetry. The one thing that could hurt the alien was a piece of the alien's own lost world, a fragment of everything the stranger had already lost. The great man would destroy the last son of a dead world using the last remnants of that same dead world. Grief itself turned into a weapon. But notice what the weapon reveals about the man who wields it. He could not defeat his enemy through strength, because he had none to match him. He could not defeat him through goodness, because that was a contest he had already lost. So he reached, as he always did, for the one advantage he possessed, his mind, and used it to find the enemy's single vulnerability and exploit it without mercy. That is his whole method in miniature. Where the alien is open, honest, straightforward, meeting every challenge head-on, the great man is indirect, patient, endlessly cunning, always searching for the hidden weakness, the unfair advantage, the poison that will bring the stronger foe low. He fights the way a weaker creature fights a stronger one, with traps and toxins and schemes, because in raw power he is nothing beside his enemy, and he knows it, and it galls him beyond measure. Every clever scheme is a reminder that he cannot simply face the alien as an equal, that he must always resort to tricks, that for all his greatness he is, in the one arena that now matters most to him, hopelessly outmatched. The kryptonite is his triumph and his humiliation at once. It lets him hurt the god. It also proves he could never hurt him any other way. For all his reliance on schemes and traps and hidden weaknesses, there came a point where he could not resist the deepest temptation of all, which was to face his enemy directly, as an equal, in a contest of raw power. And so he built himself a suit, a magnificent engine of war, armored and powerful, fitted with every weapon his genius could devise, incorporating the green poison that could sap the alien's strength, designed for one purpose above all others, to let a mere man stand toe-to-toe with a god and trade blows. It is one of the most revealing things he ever made, that suit, because of what it says about the hunger underneath all his cold calculation. He did not only want to defeat his enemy, he wanted, at least once, to defeat him with his own hands, to feel himself physically overpower the being who had effortlessly overshadowed him, to prove that a human, that he, could match the impossible power of the stranger from the sky. There is something almost childlike in that wish, buried under all the technology, and something achingly human, because the suit is, in the end, an attempt to close a gap that can never really be closed. The alien is powerful because of what he is, born to it, effortless. The great man can only approximate that power by building a machine around his fragile human body, by strapping on borrowed strength, and every moment he wears it, he knows the difference. The alien needs no suit. The alien simply is powerful. The great man must construct his power, piece by piece, and the very magnificence of the suit is a monument to the fact that without it he is, physically, nothing next to his foe, a soft and mortal creature in the presence of a god. He built the most powerful armor in the world, and it is a confession, in steel, of the one thing he can never forgive, that his greatness must always be made, while his enemies was simply given. And when he does put on the suit and face his enemy directly, something interesting happens, something that reveals the true hopelessness of his whole crusade. Even at his most powerful, even armored and armed and augmented, he is fighting to a draw at best, holding his own only through technology and the enemy's own restraint, because the alien even then holds back, unwilling to truly hurt him, fighting to stop him rather than to destroy him. And that restraint is its own kind of unbearable insult. The great man throws everything he has into the fight, every ounce of his genius and will and borrowed strength, and his enemy defeats him gently, holding back the way a grown man might restrain a raging child, without truly striking him. Even in defeat, the alien is kinder than the great man can bear, and that kindness, that maddening restraint, only proves again the thing he cannot stand, that his enemy is not only more powerful, but better, so much better, that he will not even fight back with his full strength against a man trying with everything to kill him. There is no victory available to the great man in that fight, not even in the fighting itself, because his enemy will not give him the dignity of a real battle, only the mercy of being gently, kindly, immovably stopped. There was a moment, early in their long war, that shows you exactly how his mind works and exactly how far he will go, and it is worth telling, because it is the whole man in a single act. Wanting to draw the stranger out, to study him, to test his power, and perhaps to be seen standing beside him as an equal, the great man arranged a spectacle. A grand event, a gathering of the powerful and the beautiful, and then, in the middle of it, a staged danger, a crisis engineered to summon the hero. He had arranged the whole thing himself, secretly, in order to provoke the rescue and observe the rescuer up close. And the hero came, as intended, and saved everyone, exactly as the great man had planned. But then came the part that reveals him. Rather than hide his hand, the great man could not resist revealing that he had engineered the entire crisis himself, that the danger had been his design, that he had put innocent people at risk simply to summon and study the hero. He said it almost with pride, as though expecting the hero to be impressed by the cleverness of the scheme. And the hero was not impressed. The hero was appalled. Because to the man from the sky, the great man had just confessed to endangering innocent lives for his own purposes, treating people as pieces in a game, and that was not clever, it was monstrous. The hero handed the great man over to the authorities, and in that moment the two of them understood, each in his own way, that they could never be anything but enemies. Sit with what that moment reveals, because it is the key to his whole character. The great man genuinely did not understand what he had done wrong. In his mind, the people he endangered were not the point, were barely real, were simply the necessary materials of an experiment. What mattered was the cleverness, the design, the demonstration of his own brilliance. He expected admiration for the scheme and received horror for the cruelty, and the gap between those two reactions is the exact measure of what is broken in him. He has lost, somewhere along the hard road of his life, the ability to feel the reality of other people, to grasp that they are not pieces on his board, but living beings whose suffering is real. His genius sees everything except that. He can model an economy, break a code, outthink a god, and he cannot feel in his gut that the small people he steps on are as real as he is. That blindness is the true root of his villainy, deeper even than the envy. He does not hate humanity, exactly. He simply cannot quite believe that anyone but himself is fully real. And a man who cannot feel others as real will sacrifice any number of them for his purposes and be genuinely puzzled that anyone objects. Across the long years of his war, he reinvented himself many times, and the pattern of those reinventions tells you something essential about him. He was, first, the scientist, the mad genius in the laboratory, building strange devices to strike at his foe. Then he became the businessman, the respectable tycoon, the master of industry who fought his enemy through wealth and influence and the levers of the law rather than through obvious crime. Then, in his most audacious reinvention of all, he sought and won the highest office in the land, becoming the leader of his entire nation, so that he might oppose his enemy not as an outlaw, but as the most powerful legitimate authority in the world. And at times he has gone further still, donning the symbols of heroism itself, casting himself publicly as the protector, the savior, the true champion the people should look to instead of the alien. It is worth understanding just how completely his hatred consumes him, because it has become the organizing center of his entire existence, and there is something almost tragic in the scale of the waste. Consider what this man could be doing with his time. He possesses one of the greatest minds the world has ever known, a genius that could cure diseases, solve the deepest problems of science, lift the whole human race toward a better future. He has the wealth to fund any dream, the intellect to achieve almost anything he set his mind to. He could be, by his own stated philosophy, the greatest benefactor humanity has ever known, the man who used his gifts to elevate the entire species. He has, in his hands, the power to genuinely become the hero he claims to be. And instead he pours it all, the genius, the wealth, the time, the tireless energy, into the destruction of a single person who has never wished him harm. Think of the cures not discovered because he was busy building weapons. Think of the problems not solved because his mind was occupied with schemes. Think of the good not done because a man who could have done immeasurable good chose instead to spend his one precious, extraordinary life on hatred. It is one of the great wastes imaginable, and you can feel the weight of it, a titanic mind and a titanic fortune spent not on building but on tearing down, And the terrible irony is that if he had simply let his enemy be, and turned his gifts toward the human flourishing he claims to care about, he might genuinely have become the greater man, might actually have earned the love and admiration he has spent his life failing to seize. He could have won the argument by living it. Instead, he lost it, over and over, by making his whole life about the one man he could never surpass. That is what obsession does, and you may know a smaller version of it yourself. It narrows a life down to a single point, and then it consumes everything else. Once, he was a boy with a whole open future, a mind that could have gone anywhere, become anything. Now he is a man defined entirely by his relationship to another man, unable to think of himself except in comparison, unable to measure a single day except by whether he gained or lost ground against his enemy. His great, rich, complicated self has collapsed into a single obsessive function. The hating and thwarting of one being and everything else in him, all the other things he might have been and done and loved, has withered in the shadow of that one consuming fixation. He is a genius who has made himself small, a man of infinite potential who has spent it all on a single feud, and the saddest part is that he cannot see it, cannot step back far enough to notice what his obsession has cost him, because the obsession is now the whole of who he is. There is nothing left over to do the noticing. He has become his hatred, and a person who has become their hatred can no longer imagine being anything else. There is a small, revealing detail in the way he speaks of his enemy worth noticing, because it betrays how personal the whole thing truly is beneath the grand philosophy. He almost never uses the alien's name, or the name the world has given him. He avoids it, sidesteps it, refers to him by other words, as though saying the name plainly would grant it a power he cannot afford to grant. And in the rare tellings where he does address his enemy directly, there is an intimacy to the hatred that is almost startling, the intimacy of two people bound together far more tightly than either would wish. Because that is the strange truth of a great rivalry sustained across a lifetime. The person you hate that completely, that consumingly, becomes, in a terrible way, the most important person in your life. You think about them more than you think about anyone you love. You measure yourself against them daily. You know them, or think you know them, better than you know your friends. The great man has spent more of his mind and heart on his enemy than on any other soul alive, and in doing so has made his enemy, of all things, his most intimate companion. There is a bleak loneliness in that, in having your closest relationship be with the person you most want to destroy. It means the great man is, in a sense, never truly apart from his enemy, carries him always in his mind, cannot experience a triumph without imagining how it strikes at his foe, cannot suffer a defeat without measuring it against his rival's advantage. His enemy lives rent-free in the innermost chamber of his heart, the single most present figure in his entire inner life, more constant than any friend, more intimate than any lover. And the tragedy is that this intimacy, which might in another life have been the closeness of understanding or even love, is instead the closeness of obsession, a bond of pure hatred that ties him to his enemy more tightly than any affection ever could, and gives him none of affection's comforts. He is bonded, for life, to the one person he can never have peace with and can never be free of, because his own hatred will not release him. It is worth seeing in that a warning about what our hatreds do to us, gentle and worth carrying towards sleep. Because the great man is bound to his enemy by his hatred far more tightly than his enemy is bound to him. The alien, being at peace, does not think of the great man constantly, does not measure his days against him, is not consumed. It is only the hater who is enslaved, only the one who cannot let go, who carries the other everywhere. Our hatreds do that to us. They bind us to the very people we most wish to be free of, make them permanent residents of our minds, give them a power over our inner peace that they would not otherwise have. To hate someone that completely is to give them the keys to your own heart, to let them live there always, to carry them with you into every quiet moment that might otherwise have been peaceful. The great man never understood that. He thought his hatred was a weapon aimed at his enemy. It was really a chain binding him to the one person he could never escape. And there is freedom, real freedom, in the simple act he could never perform, of setting a hatred down, of letting someone go, of refusing to carry them anymore. That freedom is available to you, tonight, in a way it never was to him. Whatever you are carrying, whoever lives rent-free in your heart, you can begin, in the quiet, to let them go, and find there a peace the great man died still searching for. Look at the shape of that progression, because it is deeply revealing. Each reinvention is an attempt to win the same argument from a new angle. Scientist, tycoon, ruler, hero, in each new role, he is trying once more to prove the thing he can never quite prove, that he is the greatest, that he and not the alien deserves the city's love, that human achievement, embodied in him, is superior to the unearned power of the being from the sky. He keeps changing costumes because no costume ever wins him the argument for good. He becomes the most powerful businessman, and still the city looks to the sky. He becomes the ruler of the nation, and still, in the people's hearts, the alien stands higher. He even dresses himself in the hero's colors, and still everyone knows the difference between the real thing and the imitation. No matter what role he assumes, he cannot become the thing he actually wants to be, which is beloved, which is admired freely, which is looked up to the way his enemy is looked up to. So he tries another role, and another, forever, a man endlessly reinventing himself in search of the one self that will finally be enough, and never finding it. Because the problem was never the role. The problem was always the hollow place inside that no role can fill. There is something exhausting even to witness in that endless reinvention, and something profoundly sad. Because a person at peace with himself does not need to keep becoming someone new. A person who knows they are enough can simply be who they are. His constant reinvention is the outward sign of an inward emptiness. A man forever trying on new selves because no self ever feels like enough, forever climbing because he never learned that the summit he was seeking was not a place you could climb to at all. He reached the top of business, the top of politics, the very top of human power, and at each summit found the same hollowness waiting for him, because he brought it with him, because it was inside him the whole time, and no external height could ever leave it behind. He is the proof, written enormous, of a truth worth carrying gently toward sleep. That you cannot outrun an inner emptiness by climbing higher in the outer world, because it climbs with you, and waits for you at every summit, patient as your own shadow. There is a way of seeing the two of them, the great man and the man from the sky, that reveals the whole thing at a stroke, and it is worth holding, because it is the truest picture of their war. They are mirror images of each other. Two beings of enormous power, each capable of reshaping the world. But where one chose to serve, the other chose to rule. Where one uses his power to lift others up, the other uses his to raise himself above them. Where one gives freely, asking nothing, the other takes and owns and demands. They are the same question, asked and answered two opposite ways. Given great power, what do you do with it? The man from the sky answered, I use it to help. The great man answered, I use it to win. And everything that divides them flows from that single difference in the heart. Let us think, quietly, about how lonely his life actually is. Because underneath all the power it is one of the loneliest lives imaginable, and it is a sad and human thing to sit with as the night deepens. He is surrounded by people always. Employees, advisors, associates, admirers, a whole empire of human beings who orbit him and depend on him and hang on his words. And he is utterly alone among them, more alone than a man on a desert island, because not one of them is truly with him. They fear him, or they want something from him, or they serve him, but none of them love him, and none of them can, because he has made himself into something that cannot be loved, only feared and used and obeyed. He has arranged his entire life so that every relationship is a transaction, every person a tool or a threat, and in doing so, he has ensured that he will never, ever be simply cared for by anyone. And this is not an accident. It is the direct result of the lesson he learned in the slums, that the world is a competition for power in which everyone is a rival and trust is a weakness. He cannot let anyone close, because closeness means vulnerability, and vulnerability, he learned long ago, is how you get destroyed. So he keeps everyone at the same careful distance, useful but never intimate. And he tells himself, this is strength, this is wisdom, this is how a great man protects himself. But it is not strength. It is a prison. He has walled himself into a solitude so complete that even at the very summit of the world, with everything a person could want, he has no one to share it with. No one who knows him, no one whose care he could actually believe. He won everything, and he is alone. And the two facts are connected, because the very ruthlessness that won him everything is what left him alone. There is a particular kind of loneliness that only the powerful know, though you may recognize a quieter version of it, and he knows it better than anyone. It is the loneliness of never being sure whether anyone would care about you if you were not powerful. Every kindness shown to him might be flattery. Every warmth might be an angle. He can never know if a single person in his life would remain if his power vanished, and that uncertainty poisons every human connection he has, because he cannot trust any of them, cannot ever quite believe that anyone sees the man rather than the empire. He has more than almost anyone alive, and because of it, he can never know if he is loved for himself. A doubt that gnaws at the heart of every rich and powerful person, and gnaws at his most of all, because his whole identity is his power, and so he cannot even imagine being loved for anything else. He does not know who he would be without the empire. And so he can never find out whether that person, the one underneath, could ever be loved. He has hidden that person so completely, even from himself, that no one will ever reach him, and he will go to his grave never knowing if the hungry boy underneath the great man was ever worth loving at all. And the reason the great man hates his mirror so much, hates him more than he has ever hated anything, is that the mirror shows him something about himself he cannot bear to look at. Because the alien proves, simply by existing, that great power does not have to corrupt, that a being of immense strength can choose kindness, service, humility, can decline to rule even when ruling is easily within reach. And if that is true, if power can be gentle, then the great man's whole life is called into question. Then his own choice to grasp, to dominate, to put himself above everyone, was not the inevitable path of a strong man in a hard world, as he has always told himself. It was just a choice, his choice, one he could have made differently. The alien is living proof that the great man could have been good, and chose not to be, and that is the one thing his pride can never, ever accept. Easier to believe the alien is a threat, a menace, a liar hiding some dark agenda, than to believe that this gentle being is exactly what he seems, and that his gentleness is a mirror showing the great man the kinder person he himself could have become and did not. So the hatred, in the end, is a kind of grief. Grief for the better man he might have been. Every time he looks at his enemy, he sees not just a rival, but a reproach, a walking reminder of a road he did not take, a goodness he told himself was impossible precisely, so that he would not have to feel the loss of never having reached for it. He cannot let that reminder stand. So he tells himself the gentle being must be false, must be dangerous, must secretly be as grasping and cynical as he is, because the alternative, that goodness is real and he simply chose against it, is more than his pride can survive. His war on his enemy is, at the deepest level, a war on his own conscience, a decades-long effort to destroy the evidence that he could have been better. And that war can never end, because you cannot kill your own conscience by killing another man. It just goes on, the greatest mind in the world forever, attacking the one thing it cannot afford to understand, which is itself. There is a strange and telling fact about the great man and his enemy, one that says more about him than almost anything else. For all his genius, for all his relentless study of the being from the sky, he never truly understood the simplest thing about him. He never grasped that the alien was not at heart a god at all, but something much closer to a humble and decent person who happened to have been born with enormous gifts. The great man, looking at his enemy, saw only power, only the threat, only the galling fact of a superior being lording it over humanity. He could not see the ordinary goodness underneath, the modesty, the genuine care, the person who did not think of himself as above anyone. And that blindness is deeply revealing, because it shows that the great man was, in a sense, looking in a mirror the whole time. He assumed his enemy must secretly crave power and worship the way he himself did, must secretly be grasping and prideful behind the humble mask, because he could not imagine anyone with that much power not wanting to rule with it. He judged his enemy by his own heart and got him exactly wrong. This is why he could never defeat his enemy through understanding, only ever through force and trickery. Because he never understood him at all. He built an entire war on a fundamental misreading of the person he was fighting, projecting his own hungers onto a being who did not share them, fighting a shadow of his own making rather than the actual gentle person in front of him. He was convinced the alien must be hiding something, plotting something, secretly as cynical as himself, and he wasted decades searching for a darkness that was not there. The simplest explanation, that his enemy was exactly as good as he appeared, was the one explanation his own nature would not let him accept, because to accept it would mean accepting that goodness with power was possible, and that he himself had simply chosen otherwise. And there is a lesson in that misreading, gentle and worth keeping, about how we see the people we envy, because we tend to do what the great man did. On a smaller scale, when we resent someone, when we envy them, we tell ourselves stories about them, that they are not really as happy as they seem, not really as good, that there must be some hidden ugliness that makes their apparent fortune bearable to contemplate. We do it to protect ourselves, because the alternative, that they simply are fortunate or happy or good, and we are not, is too painful. The great man did this on a titanic scale, could not allow his enemy to be simply good, and so invented a darkness to justify his hatred. But most of us do smaller versions of it every day, refusing to see the people we envy clearly, insisting on some hidden flaw that makes our resentment feel righteous. His great failing is our small one, magnified, and the cure for both is the same. To look at the person we envy and allow them simply to be what they are, without needing them to be secretly wretched, and then to turn back to our own life and tend it, rather than spending our days measuring it against theirs. There is a single word that unlocks him more than any other, and it is worth sitting with, because once you see it everywhere in him. The word is control. More than wealth, more than fame, more even than being the greatest, what he craves at the deepest level is control. To be in command, to hold all the strings, to ensure that nothing can happen to him that he did not choose, that no one has power over him, that he is never again the helpless creature he was as a boy in the slums, at the mercy of a hard world and a hard father. Everything he built to be safe, to be in control, to never again be vulnerable to forces beyond his command. The empire is control. The wealth is control. The endless scheming is control. He is a man trying, with every fiber of his being, to make himself the master of his own fate, so that he need never again feel the terror of being small and powerless in a world that does not care whether he lives or dies. And that is why the stranger from the sky is so unbearable to him, at a level even deeper than the envy. Because the stranger is the one thing he cannot control. A being of that power, entirely beyond his command, who could at any moment do anything, and whom the great man could not stop, represents the return of the exact terror he built his whole life to escape. He spent decades making himself invulnerable, master of his world, and then a being appeared against whom all his mastery meant nothing, who could not be bought or bent or beaten, who reintroduced into his carefully controlled world the one thing he could not abide: uncertainty, vulnerability, the possibility of being at another's mercy. The stranger did not just wound his pride. He undid the entire fortress of control the great man had spent his life constructing, simply by existing as a power beyond that control. And so the great man's rage is partly the rage of a frightened creature who thought he had finally made himself safe, discovering that he never was, that there is a power in the world he cannot command, that the terror of helplessness he thought he had banished forever was only ever a fortress wall away. The irony, of course, the deep sad irony, is that the control he craves is an illusion, and chasing it is what makes him miserable. Because no one is ever truly in control. Life is uncertain for everyone, powerful and powerless alike. The attempt to control everything is a doomed war against the basic nature of existence, and the harder he fights it, the more it exhausts and embitters him. A person at peace has made a kind of surrender, has accepted that they cannot control everything, has learned to be at ease in a world of uncertainty, to trust, to let go, to accept that some things are simply beyond their command, and that this is not a catastrophe, but the ordinary condition of being alive. He never learned that surrender, could never make it, because to him surrender meant the return of helplessness, meant being the powerless boy again. So he fights on, trying to control the uncontrollable, and the fighting never ends and never wins, because the thing he is fighting is life itself. And there is a quiet lesson in that for all of us, worth carrying towards sleep. That the peace he never found lies not in controlling everything, but in the gentle letting go of the need to. That you can set down, tonight, the exhausting effort to command every outcome, and simply rest in the uncertain flow of things, and find there a peace that all his desperate control never once gave him. There is one more fear beneath all his fears, the deepest one, the one that drives more of him than he would ever admit, and it is worth naming gently here in the dark, because it is a fear that lives in nearly everyone. He is afraid of death, not in the ordinary way that everyone is, but with a special and consuming terror, because for a man like him, death is the ultimate loss of control, the one enemy he cannot outwit, outbuild, or outbuy. Everything he has done, in a sense, has been an attempt to defeat it, or to defy it, to make himself so great and so permanent that he will not simply vanish the way ordinary people do. He wants to matter forever. He wants his name on the towers to outlast him, his empire to be his monument, his greatness to echo down the centuries, so that even after he is gone, the world will remember that he was here, that he was the greatest, that he mattered. And this is where his enemy wounds him most deeply of all, in a way that has nothing to do with any battle. Because the stranger from the sky, in a sense, does not fear death the way he does, and does not need to defeat it, because the stranger has already made his peace with mortality through the simple act of living for something larger than himself. A person who spends their life in service, in love, in genuine connection, does not need their name on a tower to feel that their life mattered, because the meaning is in the living, in the good done and the love given, not in some monument that outlasts them. The stranger is, in this quiet way, free of the terror that enslaves the great man. He does not need to be remembered forever, because he is at peace with the ordinary human fact of being mortal and small and temporary, made peaceful by the meaning he has found in how he lives. The great man cannot find that peace, and so he is enslaved to a terror the stranger has escaped, and that, more than any physical defeat, is the true measure of who has really won their long war. Because the great man, for all his power, is afraid, always, underneath, of the darkness at the end, and pours his whole life into a doomed effort to outbuild it. And the stranger is not afraid, because he found the one thing that actually answers the fear of death, which is a life so full of love and meaning that its ending, whenever it comes, cannot erase what it contained. The great man sought immortality in monuments and empire and being remembered. The stranger found it, without seeking it, in simply living well. And that is the final unbearable lesson the great man cannot learn, that the way to not fear death is not to defeat it, but to live in such a way that you do not need to fill your days with enough love and meaning that the ending loses its terror. He built a fortress against death out of stone and steel and name. The stranger dissolved his fear of death in the simple warmth of a life well lived. And of the two, it is the stranger who sleeps peacefully, and the great man who lies awake in his tower, afraid, picture him, for a moment, alone in his tower late at night. Because it is a quiet image and a fitting one to rest on, as your own thoughts begin to slow. The city spreads out far below him, 10 million lights, the great glittering kingdom he built and rules. The work of the day is done. The employees have gone home to people who love them. And he stands at the great window at the top of the world, alone, looking down at everything he owns, and there is no one there with him, and there never is. This is the summit he climbed his whole life to reach. This is what all the striving was for. And in the quiet of the night, with no one watching and nothing to prove for a few hours, even he must feel sometimes how empty it is up here at the top, how cold, how still. Somewhere out there in the same night, the other one is flying, or sleeping, or sitting quietly with the people he loves, and the great man knows it, and it gnaws at him even now, even here, even at the summit of everything. He cannot simply enjoy what he has, cannot rest in his own vast accomplishment, because his mind will not stop measuring, comparing, circling the old wound. He has more than almost any human being who has ever lived, and he cannot feel it, because he is too busy feeling the one thing he lacks. That is the curse he lives under, a curse of his own making, but no less real for that. The inability to ever be satisfied, to ever feel that what he has is enough, because there is always the other one, higher, better, loved in a way he is not, and as long as that comparison runs in his mind, no amount of having will ever fill him. There is a deep sadness in a person who has everything and can enjoy none of it, and it is worth feeling, gently, even for a man who has done such harm. Because his tragedy, stripped of all the crime and the cruelty, is a tragedy almost anyone can recognize. The tragedy of the person who cannot stop comparing, who has good things in abundance and cannot taste them because their eyes are always on someone else's plate. He is that failing carried to its furthest extreme, a man with the whole world who starves at the banquet because he cannot stop staring at the one guest who has something he does not. And if there is anything to take from him, here in the quiet dark, it is the simple resolve not to live that way. Not to let the comparing steal the sweetness from your own life. Not to stand at your own window, whatever it looks out on, unable to feel the good of what you have, because your mind is fixed on what someone else has. He never learned to stop. But you can. You can look at your own life tonight and simply let it be enough, without measuring it against anyone. And in that one small refusal, you will have found the peace that all his genius and all his empire never bought him. It is worth pausing near the end to grieve for the man he could have been, because that lost possibility is the true tragedy at the center of him. And it is a tender thing to hold in the quiet. Remember what he actually is beneath the villainy. A boy who rose from nothing through sheer brilliance and will, a mind of once-in-a-generation power, a person capable, when he chose, of genuine tenderness as he was toward his sister. All the raw materials of a truly great human being were there, in him, from the start. He had every gift a person could need to become one of the benefactors of his age, a healer, a builder, a lifter of the whole human race. The tragedy is not that he lacked greatness. The tragedy is that he had it, all of it, and pointed it in the wrong direction. Imagine the other life, the one he did not live. A man of his gifts, having risen from poverty, turning back to lift others out of the same darkness he escaped, using that vast mind to cure the diseases of the poor, to build the schools and hospitals that would give other hungry, brilliant children the chances he had to claw for. Using his fortune not to buy admiration, but to genuinely earn it, becoming beloved not through spectacle, but through the simple accumulated weight of good actually done. That man would have been happy, or as happy as a person can be, because he would have built his life on something real, on connection and contribution and care, rather than on the endless, hungry comparison that ate him alive. And when the stranger came from the sky, that man would not have felt threatened at all. He would have felt joy. Here, at last, another being devoted to helping, a partner, an ally, someone to share the great work with. The two of them, the earthly benefactor and the visitor from the stars, might have remade the world together. That is the life that was available to him, and he could not take it, and understanding why he could not is the whole sad heart of his story. He could not take it because of the wound, the old childhood wound that taught him the world was a competition, that another's rise was his fall, that he must be the greatest or he was nothing. That single false belief, planted in the cold house and the hard slum, poisoned every possibility of the better life. Because as long as he believed that only one person could be the greatest, another person's greatness could only ever be a threat, never a gift. He could not welcome the stranger, could not partner with him, could not rejoice in the good he did. Because his wounded heart could only see the world as a contest with one winner, and in that contest, the stranger's existence meant his own defeat. The better life required him to believe that greatness could be shared, that another's light did not dim his own, that the world was not a zero-sum fight for a single crown. And that was the one thing his wound would never let him believe. So the better man died unborn inside him, and the bitter one lived, and the whole world was the poorer for it, including, most of all, himself. Before we let him go entirely, it is worth turning his whole story around and looking at it not as the tale of a supervillain, but as an exaggerated portrait of a wound that lives, in some quieter form, in a great many ordinary hearts, including, perhaps, on hard days, your own. Because the engine that drives him is not exotic at all. It is one of the most common engines there is. It is the feeling of not being enough and the endless striving to prove otherwise. He is what that feeling looks like when it is given genius and fortune and never healed, allowed to grow without limit until it swallows a whole life. But the seed of it is ordinary and familiar and human, and that is why his story reaches somewhere real underneath all the schemes and the science fiction. Think of how much of ordinary unhappiness comes from exactly his sickness, in miniature. The comparing, the measuring of our lives against others, the scrolling past other people's triumphs and feeling our own smallness. The sense that no matter what we achieve, someone has achieved more, and so our own accomplishment turns to ash. The striving to be the best, the richest, the most admired, the most successful, in the hope that if we could just get high enough, we would finally feel like enough, and the discovery at every new height that the feeling of enough recedes just as fast as we climb toward it. That is his whole tragedy, and it is also, in smaller doses, a tragedy that plays out quietly in millions of lives, in the endless, exhausting comparison that steals the sweetness from perfectly good lives. And the way out, for him and for us, was always the same, and it is the gentlest and most important thing to carry down into sleep. It is to stop comparing, to understand all the way down that enough is not a place you reach by climbing higher than others, because there is no such place, because there is always someone higher, because the whole race is unwinnable by design. Enough is a decision you make about your own life, from the inside, regardless of anyone else. It is looking at what you have and what you are, and simply deciding that it is enough, that you do not need to be the greatest, that another person's light does not dim your own, that you can let others shine and shine yourself, and there is room in the sky for everyone. He never made that decision. He died, or lives on, still comparing, still striving, still certain that he must be the greatest or he is nothing. But you can make it tonight in the quiet. You can decide that you are enough exactly as you are, that you have nothing to prove to anyone, that you can stop running the exhausting race entirely and simply rest in your own life. That is the peace he never found. It cost him everything, the not finding of it. And it is available to you, right now, for free, if you will only let yourself stop climbing and lie still. So what do we make of him, in the end, as the night draws in and it comes time to let him go? He is not a simple villain, any more than the others were. He is a man of genuine and towering greatness, who rose from nothing through nothing but his own gifts, and who then let that greatness curdle, under the pressure of a single unbearable wound, into something small and bitter and endlessly destructive. He does terrible things, and the harm he causes is real, and understanding the wound underneath does not excuse the ruin he spreads. But underneath the empire and the genius and the crusade, there is a frightened, hungry boy from the slums who clawed his way to the top of the world and could not bear to find that someone else stood higher without even trying. That is who he has always been. The villain is just the armor that grew over the wound. And his story leaves us with a question worth carrying down into sleep, a quiet and genuinely useful one. What is the point of everything you build if you build it for the wrong reason? He built an empire, mastered the world, made himself great by every external measure, and none of it ever made him happy, because he built it all to fill a hole that external things can never fill. He wanted to be great so that he would finally feel like enough, and he became great. Staggeringly great, and still did not feel like enough. Because the feeling of enough was never going to come from greatness. It comes, when it comes at all, from somewhere else entirely, from being at peace with yourself, from loving and being loved, from letting go of the need to be the best. He never found that road. He had the whole world, and he never once had peace, because he was always measuring himself against someone else, always needing to be higher, always terrified of being surpassed. And a person who lives by comparison can never win, because there is always, somewhere, someone higher, and even a man who reaches the very top of the world can be undone by a single stranger falling out of the sky. So let him go now, that brilliant, lonely man at the top of his tower, still scheming, still measuring himself against a rival he can never quite defeat, still unable to rest. And let yourself sink down, away from all of it, away from the striving and the comparing and the endless need to prove yourself the greatest. Because here, in the dark, on the edge of sleep, none of that matters at all. You do not have to be the best tonight. You do not have to have built an empire, or won any race, or stood above anyone. You do not have to prove that your life meant something by towering over other lives. You are allowed tonight to simply be a person, resting enough exactly as you are, with nothing left to prove and no one to measure yourself against. That is a peace he never let himself have, but you can have it right now for free. Let the striving go quiet, let the comparing fall still. You have nothing to prove tonight and nowhere to climb and no one to beat. There is only the dark and the quiet and the soft slow fall into sleep. Rest now. You have nothing to prove. You are already enough. Sleep well.